I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, more strum and drum among American Jews over recent developments in Israel. There are American Jews and American Jewish leaders who are going public with their criticisms of Israel, suggesting that the Netanyahu government is leading Israel in the wrong direction and is implementing policies that threaten Israeli democracy. One example of this criticism is a New York Times op-ed piece written by one of world Jewry's foremost American leaders, Ron Lauder, president of the World Jewish Congress. The title of the op-ed indicates Lauder is addressing his remarks to the Netanyahu government and reads, "Israel, this is not who we are." In his piece, Ambassador Lauder refers to a series of bills passed by the Knesset, Israel's parliament, which he believes will only serve to weaken the ties American Jews, especially younger American Jews, will have with the State of Israel. He cites the government's reneging on a deal that would have created a formal egalitarian prayer section at the Western Wall. He cites the instance of a non-Orthodox rabbi being taken for questioning by the police for having participated in an Israeli wedding that had not been first performed by a rabbi with accreditation from the Orthodox chief rabbinate. He cites the fact that some convenience stores were closed to secular Israelis on Shabbat. And Ambassador Lauder contends that the Knesset's passing of a new basic law defining Israel as a Jewish state is a threat to the values of equality and democracy in Israel. In a sweeping, scathing sentence, Ambassador Lauder suggests that the Israeli government is tarnishing the sacred values of equality and that Israel is turning its back on Jewish heritage, the Zionist ethos, and the Israeli spirit. The ambassador calls Israel's actions destructive, and the president of the World Jewish Congress actually ends his New York Times op-ed by warning that Israel is on a course to no longer be, quote, the Jewish democratic state it is meant to be. Nowhere in his op-ed piece does Ron Lauder ever suggest any of these concerns about the future character of the State of Israel are unfounded, or are misguided, or are exaggerated. On the contrary, the thrust of the piece published in the New York Times by the president of the World Jewish Congress is that these criticisms of Israel all have serious merit. Now, you should know that we phoned Ambassador Lauder's office, invited him to speak about his piece on JBS. We were told that Ambassador Lauder is not doing any interviews at the moment. Well, obviously, it's no small thing when a world Jewish leader publishes this kind of critique of Israel in the New York Times. In a moment, I'm going to give another major Jewish leader, Malcolm Hoenlein, an opportunity to make any comment he wishes or not. And you should understand, we had invited Malcolm Hoenlein to be the guest on this edition of In the News before Ambassador Lauder published his op-ed piece in the New York Times. Our idea was that as JBS premieres on Spectrum throughout America, and by the way, I'm just thrilled to be receiving emails from Spectrum viewers who are now able to watch JBS. I'm thrilled. But we thought it would be wonderful to speak with Malcolm Hoenlein, to have him give us a sense of the most important issues challenging life today, and to introduce him to Spectrum viewers who may be meeting him for the very first time. So we did not invite Malcolm on tonight because of Ron Lauder's piece. But that's how timing works, and I am so pleased to have on our JBS phones now Malcolm Hoenlein, the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, which of course is the umbrella of more than 50 American Jewry's leading organizations, and the Conference of Presidents represents American Jewry in dealings with the White House and Jewish communities across the globe, including, of course, the State of Israel. And Malcolm has been a fabulous leader on the world Jewish scene. He's a dear friend and a longtime JBS viewer. Malcolm, thank you so much for joining us again, especially since this is the first time you're with JBS and with Spectrum.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, and as you know, I'm a great supporter and hear often from people who listen to the interviews and benefit from them, so I always welcome the opportunity to be able to discuss some of the critical issues that confront us here at home and abroad, and certainly there is no shortage right now, given the political developments, given some of the domestic political events and international, what we're seeing in Syria or Turkey, Iran. We have global issues of real significance, and every opportunity we have to reach the public to make them more aware is very important.
That's lovely. Okay, Malcolm, I know it's hard for any major Jewish figure to criticize another major Jewish figure in public on television. So you can decide. You heard me say we invited you on this program before Lauder published his piece. You can decide if you want to speak to the substance of Ron Lauder's op-ed or not. It's your choice. What would you like to do?
Well, I wish you had asked me this before. You spent all the time reviewing the piece. I obviously have differences with things that are in it and the wisdom of putting it in the New York Times, but I would prefer to discuss some of the really pressing issues that we're addressing.
Fair enough.
That we have to deal with.
Fair. I want to put then a question to you in a general matter, not having to do with Lauder's piece specifically. In general, how do you feel about leaders of major Jewish institutions and organizations criticizing Israel in public? And obviously, there are issues which any American Jew and American Jewish leaders can feel passionate about. The problem that I seem to find the Jewish community is facing, and we face it here on JBS all the time. To what extent should issues of criticism be made public? To what extent do they and somehow stay within the family? Leaving Lauder's piece aside, Malcolm, what advice do you give American Jewry in general about the way in which we should or should not be dealing with issues that concern us in public?
Well, it's a complicated question because it depends on the issue. It depends on the circumstances. Our practice is to try and deal directly with the government of Israel. Not everybody has the opportunity. There are those who grandstand on issues. There are those who express legitimate concerns about issues. I think that there are ample opportunities in Israeli media and others if one wants to give expression to some difference with a policy that Israel has adopted. And obviously there are those who look at what are the ramifications abroad of some of the legislative or other initiatives that are adopted. So I think it's a judgment call that has to be made in each instance about how are you effective? How do you what is the goal? Is the goal to get notice, or is the goal to try and affect change?
Yes.
Is it to sensitize? Is it to get people in Israel to pay attention and for people here to understand? And how often, as we saw in the nation-state bill, and one can argue whether it was wise or not, but it's been so distorted about what is the actual content of the bill and its impact and
Yes.
the import. So, there's no general rule you can apply. It's one of being smart and of being effective and determining how is that best affected. And in more that if Israelis look and say, well, they have no concern about us when people, for instance, after the fight in Gaza, people were critical and writing, well, they should use rubber bullets and they should use water cannons. I mean, to think that the Israeli generals didn't think of that also, and the people who live down there say, well, you come here and stand there with rubber bullets and see if you can stop thousands of or tens of thousands of people who are there. So if you want Israelis to listen, we have to talk to them in credible ways, and frankly, they should be listening to us. And I encourage all of the exchange programs and other things where we learn to understand. But the critical thing is that we have to remain one people, and we have to stand together. We're starting a campaign called We Must Be One, because no matter what differences We have to be one. We need it in the diaspora. We need a strong Israel. We need to have the relationship, and Israel needs to have the relationship with the communities around the world. It's a mutual relationship, and the sum of the parts the whole is far greater than just the sum of the parts.
Yes.
And it's the one lesson of Jewish history that every challenge was too great when we were disunited. When we were united, there wasn't anything we couldn't achieve. And that, I think, is the critical question. One has to assess, when is it appropriate, in what form is it appropriate, how do you want to be effective, and think about how people will exploit it who don't have the good intention, but will use something that somebody else wrote or said to negative effect on Israel and the Jewish people.
Yes. Well, your point about what's the goal really has to be a major concern. I think you said it very well. I want to express a thought to you, and then I want you to tell me whether you're comfortable with it or not. What bothers me is that while there are issues that can concern American Jews or Jews anywhere in the world, Israelis are concerned. When it's put in an op-ed piece in the New York Times, it conveys the notion that the issues being addressed in that piece are of great significance to the state of Israel and to world Jewry, when in reality, very often, even if they're legitimate issues, they are slivers in terms of importance. They do not affect the overall functioning, character, quality of the state of Israel. But unless they're put into context, when you read a problem, when you see a problem stated in the New York Times, the suggestion is this is a major issue that affects Israel's society and American-Jewish relations in a global sense, when in reality it can be a very, very narrow, parochial issue. And therefore what concerns me, Malcolm, is that when anybody, forget this particular piece, somebody writes a piece published in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, it gives the reader, especially the uninformed reader, a disproportionate sense of the importance of whatever is being written about. What are your feelings on this issue?
Well, too often the New York Times not only is it disproportionate, but it's also distorted about a lot of the issues and concerns that are raised. And many of them are obviously inside baseball. These are issues within the Jewish community, within the Jewish people, Israel's relations with communities or practices within Israel that can be legitimately debated. The people have a right to criticize policies adopted by Israel, but you have to think about the consequences and what are the ramifications. How does this impact others' views who do not understand the context and who, may read just something or read a story in the Times, and we see how distorted their coverage of, for instance, Gaza has been. And they don't talk about the terrorists attacking. They talk about, that somebody died, it said, in a raid. It doesn't say that they launched 150 missiles against Israel. So the whole context is lost, and you're talking about general population that are not nuanced and don't understand the full context of things.
Yes.
And I think that there are ample opportunities in other ways to give expression. But, and part of the problem for me is that the energies and the attention is diverted from the vital issues and challenges that we face. People that write about this don't talk about BDS, or if they pick up another subject, they won't talk about what is really happening in Gaza or on the Syrian border, or about what the threats that Iran now taking shipments of enriched uranium back from Russia, already 2 of them at 20% enrichment, or the new missiles that they just exposed that are homemade, and their efforts in shooting anti-ship missiles near the Straits of Hormuz, and what Houthis did attacking 2 Saudi ships, oil tankers, and really developments of great significance. What is happening in Turkey, the collapse of the currencies in both in Iran and Turkey, and what this will mean. We have really vital and critical issues. We see, Corbyn's activities in Great Britain and being exposed more and more about how deep his anti-Israel animus and maybe anti-Jewish animus. We see the loss of the center in Europe, and we're seeing so many manifestations. There are candidates running in America who openly express anti-Semitic views, and others who are blatantly anti-Israel, hostile to Israel, and profess it. And these are things that really require our attention and require a united community to stand and deal with the challenge of these challenges. These are things that could affect us for generations to come. We see the political dynamic and the greater partisanship and divisiveness in the political process and in public discourse. These are serious issues and challenges that I want to see our energy and our efforts devoted to it. Mm-hmm. Again, we want to see Israel as perfect as it can be, and they have a political reality that they deal with and in which they operate that we have to understand and correctly assess. You look at there are you can take any incident anywhere in the world and focus on it and then make it a broader implication out of it when, in fact, it is, as you put it, maybe a more narrow issue. But I understand people's concerns, and we have to create forum where they can discuss it. Look, I don't think there's any government in the world that is more open to discourse with foreign communities than the government of Israel is, and perhaps knows it, and they have to be more dialogue with members of the Knesset and to get to understand each other, and what sometimes people don't see when they're so close to it, as distance gives them greater clarity.
Okay. It's wonderful to hear you begin to mention a catalog of the real issues you think the Jewish community should be paying attention to, and I want to come back to that. I just have to put one last issue to bed. The Knesset's passing the basic law on the Jewish nature of the State of Israel. Malcolm, it's been portrayed as an assault on equality and democracy in Israel. Are you concerned about the well-being of equality and democracy in Israel?
I'm worried about the well-being of democracy everywhere in the United States, in Israel, any place else, because it's not something you take for granted. But I think Israel's democracy is secure and healthy and well. I do think that there's a lot of distortion about what the nature and the content of this bill. As I said, you can certainly legitimately question the wisdom of adopting it, or the timing, or some of the content and the absence of certain language and the reaction of sectors of the Israeli populace to it. So these are all legitimate considerations, but not to use it to brand the country and to distort the reality of on the ground or any segment of the population in that regard. So again, I always hope that when it comes to the Congress of the United States or administrations or those in Israel or anywhere in the world, that people not just react or act on a basis of an immediate need or sectarian interest, but look at the broader picture.
Okay. You gave us a notion of what you consider to be some of the critical issues challenging Jewish life today. I want you to pick one or two that you think are the most pressing. Right now, what gives you, Malcolm, the most concern in terms of the challenges facing whether it's Israel or Jewish life as a whole?
Well, on Jewish life as a whole, it's the loss of hundreds of people every day, of the disaffection and the numbers of people who don't identify. I always believe that is a critical concern that we should all be involved with, making sure that every child gets a Jewish education, to enable them to have the ability to relate to the community in a way that is meaningful to them and to their heritage and to their faith. And I think those are always priorities. The first responsibility of the community is to build a Jewish school, and there is a collective responsibility for this. So that, I would say, is first and foremost, obviously, the security of Israel, which when we see how Israel's energy independence, oil independence, the miraculous high-tech industry, the breakouts in China and Asia, in India and other parts of Asia, the African interest in Israel, Israel's amazing assistance to thousands of Syrians, and all of the good stories. But we can't take for granted Israel's security. You see the rockets flying from Gaza, which has about 15,000 rockets, let alone Hamas in the north with 150,000 rockets. The encroachment of Iranian-backed militia onto the nearer to Israel's border. There are about 80,000, and by the biggest estimates, some will say it's a lower number, but whatever, it's tens of thousands of Afghanis and Iraqis that Iran has their Shiite militia who are integrating into the Syrian forces, so it's hard to separate them, and they will become part of the permanent presence. And seeing Iran establish a permanent presence, I think, is a real danger to Jordan, to Israel. Syria will rebuild its army over time, and the question is, what will be the dominant force? Well, how will you control the presence of in Lebanon and in Syria today, and Iran in Iraq, and Iran in Yemen? And trying to expand their footprint through the region and their support for terrorist operations. Thank God now, because of the sanctions, which I think are very important, the economy is crumbling. The rial is down almost 90% from a year ago, and many of the European companies, despite the assurances given by European governments, they're not listening. They're getting out because they don't want to lose the opportunity to do business with the United States because of a minimal trade with Iran. So you have Iran. I don't know what Iran will do if it gets more desperate, but certainly we see the young people inside the country, the constant demonstrations, their rejection of the regime, and our need to support them. Then you have Turkey also facing a collapsing currency, and he too both of them are building bases all over the region, military bases. One wants to build the Ottoman Empire, one wants to build the Persian Empire, and their goals are first of all in conflict with one another, but they're certainly destabilizing and dangerous for the region. We see Russia's presence there, even though they have a minimal investment and footprint in Syria itself. But they have cleverly taken advantage of the situation and renewed their ties with both Iran and Turkey, who have had very difficult and troubled relations with Russia in the past. And then I would say the rise of anti-Semitic forces in Europe, the candidates that are emerging, the extremism in the political process. Corbyn has become a poster child, but it's certainly not exclusive to him. And the fact that European Jewish leaders are speaking up and others are beginning to take note, and that the Labour Party is taking note of it. But there has to be much more of a rejection, because we are giving a permission then when the leader of the Labour Party can lay wreath at the grave of the killers of the Munich athletes from Israel. I mean, what more detestable act could you have, let alone his comments and the history that he has had. And as I said, I'm worried about any of that transposing into the United States, where we see the rise of extremist candidates running for Congress, people more and more blatantly, both anti-Semitic, racist, and hostile to Israel. I hope none of them will win. But the very fact that this becomes part of the if it's acceptable, or even if it's a presence within the political dialogue and discourse, is very troubling to me. And I fear the loss of the center here as well. And the parties moving. We see some of the trends in the Democratic Party, which we cannot allow. To see Israel become a partisan issue, it has to be bipartisan. We need support across the board, and I do believe the majority of Democrats still are with us. We have to make sure that we retain the support in both houses of both parties. And thank God in the votes in the recent weeks, you saw it on the military aid to Israel, the Iron Dome research, the missile defense systems, now the Human Shield bill, hopefully so many other pieces of legislation which support and enhance the U.S.-Israel special relationship are passing and are being adopted by big majorities.
You know, when I hear you talk about all the issues challenging us, it sounds very overwhelming, Malcolm.
Look, if you think about the past, it was much worse. When you think about all of the naysayers, you know, the CIA wrote President Truman not to recognize Israel, saying that in 2 years it won't exist. We look at all of those who made predictions and who tried to bring about the end of Israel, and Israel today is stronger than ever. The Jewish people coming out of the worst possible experience of any people on earth, the Shoah, the Holocaust. We are growing, we are strong, we have tremendous institutions, we have more Jewish learning. We have challenges. We have to be honest about it. We have problems within the community or outside of the community. We have to confront them, but we can only win when we are united.
Yes.
It's only when we stand together.
Yes.
If we're going to be pitted against each other, and that is my complaint about a lot of the issues that you raised, is that we have to sustain unity, not an artificial unity, but a one that really is Kish Echad B'Lev Echad, when we feel and understand and even if we have differences, but we understand each other and we can work together and we respect whatever differences exist. But understand, bottom line, we have one faith and one fate, and what happens to one of us happens to all of us. And we have, thank God, a tremendous record to look at of the rescue of Ethiopian Jews and Russian Jews and Syrian Jews and Iraqi Jews, Iranian Jews, etc. The one condition again there, just as in the past, was when Jews stood together. We marched together, we demonstrated together, and thank God we have a government of Israel and an IDF that could help. This is a great time for Jews, I think. But we have challenges that we also have to take into account.
I love the way you say it, and Malcolm, no one has done more for the Jewish people and the state of Israel than you have. Thank you so much for making the time to share your thoughts here on JBS. And again, with the Spectrum audience, now that we have the Spectrum audience. And if I don't have the chance to be with you before the holidays, I want to wish you and your entire family the most wonderful of New Year's. May you have health, and may there be joy, and may there be fulfillment for you. And you just continue to do the wonderful work you do on behalf of all of us. I love you very much, Malcolm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well.
You too, and Shana Tova to all your listeners and viewers.
Thank you so much. The thoughts of Malcolm Hoenlein, again, Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. And it is always very special to have him on and be able to talk to him about all the issues that are affecting world Jewry. Look, I think there are many issues within the Jewish community relating to Israeli policies that should be discussed. But when someone of Ambassador Lauder's stature writes a piece slamming Israel, it elevates issues way out of perspective and only serves to confirm the idea that Israel no longer places a value on equality and democracy. It questions whether there should be this enormous support and affection and pride for the state of Israel. And what someone of stature should do now is write a piece putting these issues into proper context while reminding readers of the New York Times of all the incredibly wonderful things the Israeli people are doing every single day. And no American who ever visits Israel ever experiences a sense of second-class status from the Israeli people. And I want to reiterate our invitation to Ambassador Lauder. We would love to have him on JBS anytime he wishes to join us. As always, my thanks to our director, Sloan Copeland, editors Liam Ahern, Ben Greenfield, and John McDevitt, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.